It was also very interesting to me to see the tension between, on one hand, treatment, the desire to cure, which could be religiously or later scientifically motivated, versus the simple, straightforward confinement and containment impulse, and how that sort of changed over the centuries that you write about.
Well, that's right. I mean, one consequence was, of course, the Enlightenment and the development of scientific investigation, the development of the origins of modern medicine, when doctors were saying, well, surely there's more that can be done with these poor creatures simply than whipping them and locking them up, as in the medieval scenario, or doping them up with opium.
Yeah.
And that's when basically the origins of psychiatry began, with interested doctors and scholars actually dissecting brains and saying, well, this fellow's behaviour was very strange during his life. Now if we look at his brain, we'll see that there's sort of like 3 ounces of water on it. No wonder he was peculiar. So there's a step away from the religious idea, the Christian idea that madness was really in effect being possessed by devils, and a move to a scientific rationale, which was that madness must be organic in origin. And obviously, given the wide net of their diagnostic criteria, to some extent they were correct, because in their concept of madness, we included things like hypertrophy, water on the brain, or GPI, which is the old-fashioned name for general paralysis of the insane, which is secondary syphilis, or other things that are quite obvious today, like Down syndrome or Parkinson's. If you had Parkinson's in the 18th century, you would have been regarded as mad rather than suffering from a degenerative nerve disease.
Now, tell me about this phenomenon of going to visit the mad like a tourist, because I was struck by the fact that we don't know a great deal about, in the sort of popular imagination, we don't know a great deal about medical treatments from previous centuries. And yet this image of people who are going on tours of asylums is really well ingrained even today. And I wondered if, you say towards the end of the book that there is some kind of sort of fascination which endures. There's something that makes us want to contemplate madness. And I wondered if you saw a thread there between earlier centuries and the present one.
Well, I do really. It's something I was reflecting on last week in another interview. I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but I often think that the Big Brother phenomenon is in some respects a continuation of 18th century visitors flocking to the gates of Bedlam to look at the lunatics. The big distinction is, of course, that the young and the hopeful, which is mainly the young, audition to go on Big Brother, and they put themselves in the stocks in front of us. They really want to be humiliated and look stupid because there's money at the end of it, and they're obsessed with fame. They want to be celebrities. Whereas, of course, in the 18th century, if your friends or your priest committed you to Bedlam, you had very little choice in the matter. But I think there is the same voyeuristic fascination, and what intrigued me was when I went to the exhibition about Hogarth about 3 years ago at Tate Britain. The two most popular exhibits were the Rake's Progress and the Harlot's Progress, which appeal to the tabloid reader in all of us. It was the Rake's Progress and the sketches of Bedlam that they were most drawn to, even now. So I think people are fascinated by this idea of disintegration. But there's also the idea that people were put on view, and that this was a form of holiday entertainment that you would take in between going to see the zoo, the menagerie at the Tower of London, and the puppet shows and all the stalls that were put up on Moorfields Common on the holidays. I was going to say bank holidays. They weren't really, they were more like religious holidays.
But did it have any kind of moral improving function or intended function, or was it purely spectacle?
Well, it was deplored by many writers who felt that it was far from morally uplifting, it was degrading, and that the inmates would benefit from having some stoical, sympathetic, quiet visitors, say like Quakers or well-intentioned charitable people or religious people. There was increasing anxiety towards the end of the 18th century that it was a freak show. I don't get the feeling that there was much of an idea that it could be morally improving, unlike, for instance, going and walking around cemeteries and looking at the tombs of the great and good, which was thought to be morally improving. And of course, what happened was in the 1770s, the sort of dynasty of Monroes who took over decided to cease this pattern, and they closed the galleries so that you couldn't just walk in and have a look round on a day off anymore. The only way you could get in was by a special ticket, and you'd have to have a very good reason to go and look round. The sad thing about this was that it meant that a lot of abuse went unnoticed for generations, because no longer could people go round and poke the lunatic through the bars, but they also couldn't say, well, I don't think he should be chained up, or she doesn't look very, very happy.
Yes. So it went from being a sort of rather vile public spectacle to being hidden away and removed from sight entirely.
Absolutely, yes. Although there were attempts by the Munros to care for their charges and to introduce good regimes, sadly what happened is that, as in many other mental hospitals over the years, a culture sort of took over of despair almost. So you started off with good people working there, and over the course of the years they became sort of corrupt and demoralised and case hardened.
Let me ask you, Catherine, having tackled these two subjects, I think I read somewhere that you have in mind a trilogy, and I sort of wondered what the third tome in the trilogy was going to be.
It's called, at the moment, it's called City of Sin, London and its Vices. So it's mainly about vice. It's mainly about prostitution and sort of allied subjects in drinking, gambling, but mainly sort of about sexual vice.
Right. So still potentially dark, but perhaps not quite as dark in all respects as
in some respects more entertaining to write, and
yes.
in some respects probably quite laugh out loud funny, I hope.
Yes.